Does tracing a church's origin back to the apostles solidify its authority, or is it just a minor historical detail that doesn't really matter? Now, if you had to trace the history of your church, how far back in time could you go? 20 years, 100 years, 500 years, or 2000 years? What if you had to trace your history of watching our channel? Would you need to go back just a week, a month, or even a year? Whether you've been with us since day one or if this is your first time watching our video, remember to like our video, subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so that you don't miss any of our videos. And make sure that you share our videos with your friends and family. We'd really appreciate it. Now, coming back to church history. Would your church's origin story begin with a modern day pastor, a televangelist, a Reformation leader, or with one of the 12 apostles of Jesus? For most Protestant Christians, the church they attend was probably started by a local pastor, someone who felt called by God to start a church. But this is not the case for Catholics. The origins of the Catholic Church can be mapped all the way back to the apostles themselves, thanks to the apostolic succession. So, if you had to choose one church that could say it was founded by Jesus, wouldn't the Catholic Church have the upper hand? Or would its lineage just be an ancient history with no real significance or correlation to its authority? To answer this, we need to understand what apostolic succession is. Is it really that important? Is it even biblical? Let's find out. Now, the word apostle comes from the Greek word apostolos, meaning one who has been sent like a messenger. We see a clear example of this in John chapter 20 verse 21 when Jesus explains to the disciples that he sends them to preach the good news just as the Father sent him. Here the Greek word for sent is apostello, meaning being sent with authority or being commissioned. So is this just an expression that Jesus used to describe the general role that all Christians have in fulfilling the Great Commission? Or was it something more specific to the apostles? When we look at Jesus' words to the apostles on this and two other instances from the Bible, it's clear that Jesus intends for the apostles to preach on his behalf. They receive the authority of the one who commissions them, transforming them from mere disciples into appointed apostles. They don't just share Jesus' teachings, but even perform mighty works like him. So, when Jesus talks about sending the apostles just as the Father sent him, it signifies a unique calling separate from the general mandate for all believers to testify to the gospel. It resembles more of a specialized ministry or office explicitly entrusted by Jesus to the apostles. But is the concept of apostolic succession even biblical? Or is it something that was just invented by the church later on? Soon after Jesus' ascension, Peter and the rest of the disciples were gathered together in the upper room. And what was the first item on their agenda? Replace Judas. Not because they were trying to mean or be insensitive or anything, but because they needed to appoint someone to take up his place as apostle. It says in Acts 1, his office let another take. And then they began to look at disciples who had been with them right from Jesus' baptism till his resurrection and ascension and chose two potential candidates, Joseph called Barsabbas and Matthias. Finally, they prayed and cast lots, and Matthias was selected to replace Judas. Now, in this passage, the word office comes from the Greek word episkope, meaning the overseer or bishopric. This is the same word used in 1 Timothy 3 when St. Paul lists the qualifications of a bishop to Timothy. St. Paul also warns Timothy later on to not be hasty when laying on of hands or when appointing new leaders in the church. So it's quite clear from these passages that while there was the general body of believers who were called to share the gospel in their own way, there was also a separate ministry of the apostle who was specifically chosen and allotted for the role. Their authority, position, role and responsibility would of course be different from all the other disciples. Now, if apostolic succession was something invented by later Catholics to prove their connection to Jesus and his apostles, then it wouldn't be something that was taught and followed by the immediate successors to the apostles, right? So what if we look at the writings of the early church fathers, especially the apostolic fathers who lived and taught in the second half of the first century and into the first half of the second century? They were the ones who were either personally taught by the apostles or their successors, since they were authorities on matters of faith and doctrine and were responsible for passing on the teachings of the apostles of the followers of Christ. wouldn't their writings serve as evidence for apostolic succession? So, is there any evidence of apostolic succession in the writings of the early church fathers? Yes, of course. One example comes from the writings of Pope Clement I, who is believed to have been the second or third successor of Saint Peter. In his letter to the Corinthians, he writes, "Through countryside and city, the apostles preached and they appointed their earliest converts, testing them by the Spirit to be the bishops and deacons of future believers. Nor was this a novelty, for bishops and deacons had been written about a long time earlier. Our apostles knew through our Lord Jesus Christ that there would be strife for the office of bishop. For this reason, therefore, having received perfect foreknowledge, they appointed those who have already been mentioned, and afterwards added the further provision that if they should die, other approved men should succeed to their ministry." Another example can be found in the writings of Saint Irenaeus, who was trained by Saint Polycarp, the bishop of Smyrna and successor of John the Apostle. In one of his many passages on the topic, he says that anyone searching for the truth can find in the apostolic tradition passed down from the apostles to the bishops. He even calls those who deviate from this tradition as heretics. In another passage, he explains that instead of listing all the church successions, since it would take too much space, he instead focuses on the oldest and most important, the church in Rome, founded by Saint Peter and Saint Paul, as a clear example of the apostolic tradition of succession. So even though it might be hard to find an all-inclusive list containing all the successors from the apostles till date, just like Saint Irenaeus suggested, the papacy would be the obvious proof for apostolic succession right from Saint Peter up to the current pope. So, apostolic succession wasn't just a newer practice that Catholic leaders used to pass on traditions or establish churches. It was a system that was put in place by the apostles themselves. It's how Jesus intended to pass on his authority, the teachings and traditions from the apostles to their successors, the bishops. This means that it not only adds to the credibility of the Catholic Church's claim to be the true church founded by Jesus and the apostles, but it also gives the Catholic Church the same authority that Christ passed on to the apostles to teach and preach in his name. So, what do you think about this? Do you think apostolic succession is a valid reason for believing that the Catholic Church is the true church founded by Jesus? Or do you think that it doesn't matter anymore? Let us know in the comments below. Also, if you like this video, let us know by liking and subscribing to our channel. It really helps us a lot. Until next time.